The southern Hemi is teasing. I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, April 28th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If there's something you don't understand or you have a comment, write it up in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to reply. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you may. Hit the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign on it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Coach Nate, Evolution Moto, Tim Caston, Elliot Harris. These are all our longtime contributors. Thank you all very much. And then, of course, my friend Bones8057. Thank you for your contribution. And then some other contributors, Paul Frazen and Scott Robinson. Again, thank you all very much. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by taking a quick look at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. Here is New Zealand, Australia, Ross Ice Shelf and Antarctic ice, and of course Chile and Peru in this area. And Tahiti hiding somewhere in there. What we do see is a small gale, very small, with 31-foot seas developing southeast of New Zealand. This is the first part of the tease I was talking about, with much more behind it. But before we get into all that, let's take a look at current conditions. We're going to start in Northern California. This buoy, the Point Sur, California buoy, number 157. It's actually like off of Monterey Bay, a little bit south of there, or actually like the Carmel area. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy from way up at 33.3 second period, real long period energy, down to 5 second period, just pure wind chop. And we're looking where the bumps are. It looks like there's some sort of a swell at 13 seconds, and I think most of this is actually coming from the north. Then you see our wind swell sort of intermixed in there. Do some fancy math and you get the primary swell 3.1 feet at 13 seconds from 289 degrees. Theoretically, that makes surf at about 4 feet. And there are waves definitely chest high in the Northern California area. And then the secondary swell, 5.5 feet at 6.3 seconds. This is the wind, driving northwest wind. Springtime has definitely arrived on the coast from 315 degrees, and that's about waist-high surf. And then you can also see the chop height, 3.8 feet. Anything more than about 2 or 2.5 feet is pretty bumpy and pretty ugly. And then we go down south. Oh, yeah, here we go. Point Loma South buoy. This is off of San Diego, buoy number 191. Same sort of profile. There's some sort of energy here at 15 seconds, which we suspect is actually like a really tiny New Zealand swell, and then the same filtered wind swell stuff coming through the Channel Islands. Primary swell, here we go, 3.1 feet at 8.1 seconds from 287 degrees. That is surf at 2.5 feet, so what's that, thigh high or something? And then that secondary swell, 1.4 feet at 14.2 seconds from 214. Yeah, 214 is definitely a New Zealand swell, and that's surf at 2 feet, so, you know, need a thigh high, something like that. And, of course, the chop height, much less because the Channel Islands filter that out. Let me go to the south shore of the Hawaiian Islands, the Lanai buoy number 239, a much smaller profile there. What is that? There's a little peak there at maybe 12 or 13 seconds at 0.7 of a feet, so not a whole lot going on. Primary swell, 1.2 feet at 12.8 seconds from 220 degrees. That's surf at 1.6 feet, and then some wind swell mixed in there at about 1.5 feet at 10 seconds, not even really worth talking about. So, all in all, pretty small surf everywhere along our forecast area, California and Hawaii, but with primarily northwest wind swell dominating. All right, so let's just do a quick look. What's been going on for the past week? We're back to Sunday, the 21st of April. There was this little gale that pushed under New Zealand there. can see it with 26-foot seas and just barely in the Hawaii swell window and fading quickly after that. We think some tiny energy from that is hitting the south shore of the Hawaiian Islands, but not much. You saw it on the buoys, nothing of any real interest. Yes, there was a gale down here in the south central Pacific, but when these traverse, we call it a zonal flow, when they move from west to east, almost no energy reaches up into the northern hemisphere. You really need a gale or a storm pushing to the northeast. Again, this is significant wave height, so it assumes there's a gale and some wind acting on the ocean surface to create some seas. So we get into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Really what I'm going to show you is a whole lot of nothing here. Another gale, again, taking aim at Antarctica, fish storm only. Here's another gale off of Patagonia, not even in the California swell window, so we're not going to focus on that. And then here we are, currently our gale developing southeast of New Zealand. So for the past week, there has not been a whole lot going on in the South Pacific, meaning there's no swell in the water for at least the next week for California and Hawaii. That said, the pattern looks like it's going to change significantly and rather quickly. And to focus on that and talk about the changes coming, we're going to start up at the upper levels of the atmosphere. Why that? Well, the jet stream level winds are what support the formation of gales. So we look at the jet stream. These are winds up about 30,000 feet. And when they form a trough, a dip into the jet, that's what helps create low pressure down at the ocean surface. So a trough, just like, so there's New Zealand there, just like there. You get this little bend, and that starts allowing a clockwise flow to form in the upper level of the atmosphere, an eddy. That manifests itself down at the ocean surface, and a clockwise circulation in the southern hemi is the hallmark of low pressure. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, starts generating winds. Those winds impart energy to the ocean, create seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area of a gale, then they turn into swell, and swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we're looking for a trough. We have one southeast of New Zealand right now, but then you see the opposite of trough, a ridge, the jet pushing hard into Antarctica. That does absolutely nothing for swell production. As we get into Sunday night, which is pretty much, this would be 5 o'clock on Sunday, right about the time we're recording now, you see the trough continues, lifting north, further north. Not a whole lot of winds pushing up into this trough, but now in the southern hemi, you don't need as much wind for whatever reason as you do in the northern hemi to get meaningful troughs. So decent trough, starting to get cut off as we get into Tuesday, and then it is pretty much cut off with from the main flow, with the main flow going this way. This trough just sort of off on its own, a cut off low. Now here's where the fun starts. We get into Wednesday, and look at this. We're talking 180 knot winds pushing north up to almost the southern point of New Zealand. And that, in fact, look at that. We had 190 knot winds. You don't get winds that strong very often in the southern hemi. So that's kind of a good sign, suggesting some support for gale development. This would be Wednesday into Thursday. And then here comes another one on Friday into Saturday. And if we're lucky, there we go. And yet another one just as strong on Sunday into Monday, all in the New Zealand area. Why is that, you ask? Well, during the summer after a reasonably strong El Nino, typically the red X is on the southwest Pacific, New Zealand swells. During La Nina years, for whatever reason, it seems like the center of storm formation is more due south of California. So depending on where you live and what your breaks are and what the swell angle is, it maybe is a good thing or maybe is a bad thing. But at least for Northern California, this southwest New Zealand angle is definitely a great thing. Southern California, I think, more favors the due straight south swells. Not that the southwest ones are bad, just some of the premier breaks seem to focus better on more like a 180 to 190 degree swell versus the 210 or 215 degree type plus swell angles. So at the jet stream level, things are looking promising. So let's go take a look down at the ocean surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds, New Zealand there, Australia there. Ross Ice Shelf, somewhere around 65 south. Here is our little gale. It is tiny, but it has 50-knot winds aimed off to the northeast. That is as of Sunday morning, building to 55 knots. That was about noontime today, and even as of right now, according to this model, 50 to 55-knot southwest winds aimed well off to the northeast, exactly what we want, and lifting north into Monday. Still 50-knot winds lifting north, and then fading some as we get into Tuesday. Then here comes another broad gale on Wednesday, trying to organize south of New Zealand with 40-knot winds. We prefer 45-knot winds. 40-knot winds will get you like a 15-second period swell, maybe a little bit better. 45 gets you in the 16, 17 second. Oh, there we go, 45-knot winds. All right, that's good. Lifting off to the northeast, continuing into Wednesday night, and still, look at this, over a broad area. Disregard this portion of the gale, this fetch, all aimed at Antarctica, penguin storm for sure, and then that system fades out Thursday night. Here comes our next one with 50-knot winds aimed off to the northeast, maybe a little bit shadowed at this position right here relative to Hawaii, but it'll sneak into the window just barely, certainly good for California, and lifting again well off to the northeast, exactly what we want. And then here comes another one now on Saturday night into Sunday, sort of faltering. Looked good on the Jetstream, not as good on the surface level charts. All right, let's go take a look and see what effect these winds are going to have on the ocean surface. All right, so first our first little gales in the south central Pacific with 31.7 foot seas. These are the highest seas over this entire domain. Here's their actual coordinates where they're at. 56 south, that looks about right, and about, what was that, 158? Oh, 168, sorry, 168 west. Okay, and wind speeds, 59.5 knots at that location. Pretty sweet. All right, building as we get into later Sunday night with 37.8 foot seas, 37.9 feet as we get into Monday morning, 37.9 again midday Monday, 37.5 Monday afternoon, 35.8, you get the idea, and then fading from there. So that is a good little gale. As we get into Wednesday, here comes another system under New Zealand with 32 foot seas, building to 36 feet, and then 35 feet on Wednesday night, and then sort of fading from there, but lifting well off to the northeast. Another one right behind that with 40 foot seas, and way back here, I actually ran the math, that is in the California swell window. Maybe not for Hawaii. Well, actually, Hawaii might get some surf pushing up through the Tasman Sea, and we're not even, in fact, okay, we'll play the game. Tasman Sea, Fiji there. Yes, I mean, normally you want these gales pushing up that way. This is more focused on California and Tahiti and that sort of area, if you believe the models. Into Friday, what do we have? 40-foot seas, up to 42-foot seas. Now, this is an upgrade from this morning's run of the model. Again, this is kind of far out into the future. Not sure I completely believe this, but looking solid indeed. And yet, one more little system behind that, with 32-foot seas or something like that. So looking like there is definitely surf on the way. And I'll qualify that. Surf from probably the first gale. The three after that, definitely maybe sort of situation. You know, don't believe the model's more than 3 days out, but for now, looking pretty good. Let's go take a quick look in the northern hemisphere just for fun. Yeah, some little low pressure on Monday off of the Pacific Northwest generating 17-foot seas. And then there's this odd little thing forecast off Kamchatka on Tuesday, the 30th of April with 23-foot seas. That's maybe good for some background swell for the north shore of the Hawaiian Islands. And maybe another little pulse coming off there with what, 23-foot seas. So again, building to 25 foot. Okay, that's a little bit new on the charts now. And pushing over the North Dateline region, so maybe some swell for both Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast, but that's on Saturday, almost a week from now. Don't believe it for a second, but it is a fun little tease. All right, local wind forecasts for the U.S. West Coast, California here, Point Conception. San Francisco, Cape Mendocino, Southern California down here. In these summertime situations, you can see the high pressure, or springtime, let's say. High pressure, this is a pretty typical pattern, wedging, pushing, ridging into the coast. This tightens up the isobars along California, creates northwest winds. Southern California, pretty much immune to all this except in the worst cases, so relatively clean conditions would be expected there while it's a blown out mess north of Point Conception. Hawaii, under moderate trades, 15 knots, but off of California, it's 20 knot northwest winds and not great. So we get into Monday, the gradient only tightens, 20 to 25 knot west winds, lots of upwelling north of Point Conception, light trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Tuesday, things even get worse, 25 to 30 knots along the north and central coast, light trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Wednesday, pretty much the same thing for Hawaii too. Thursday, finally the gradient starts to relax a little bit, maybe 10 knot winds down here in Big Sur and points south of there, but still pretty windy north of Monterey Bay. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. And then Friday, still the same pattern. New high pressure building in at, 1030 millibars, setting up stronger trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Saturday, now this is an interesting feature. Low pressure forecast developing off of Oregon. That's a lot of fetch coming out of the northwest on Saturday. That could make wind swell for California, though local winds not too bad on Saturday morning. Trades 20 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. And then as we get into Sunday, you see the low just pulling right in off of San Francisco. Northwest winds not too bad. If anything, back in here, you might get a little patch of southerly winds. At least that's what it showed earlier. Now, this run of the model, maybe not so much, just more of a northwest blow. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands, and then we're into Sunday. Things mellow out. Let's go take a look, if you can believe it, at precipitation. Again, California right here. If you're going to have a low that close to the coast, one would think, now blue is precipitation, nothing is happening yet, but one would think that maybe there's odds for precipitation. So we're just into, you look up here, Tuesday, Wednesday, nothing. But as the low gets closer, right around in there, Saturday, next week, Saturday morning, look at the rain theoretically just off the coast, and it's raining from Monterey Bay northward by Saturday evening, all through the evening, reaching south to Point Conception. Sunday morning, rain poised for Southern California. May 5th, really? And look at this, snow for the Sierra, probably higher elevations only, and rain all the way through Sunday. And then, well, that's the end of the model, and then it clears out. This seems like highly unrealistic, but something to keep in mind if you have plans for next weekend, especially on Sunday. Snowfall amounts, we're not even really looking at the resorts. This is for the Tioga Pass Road and the Pacific Crest Trail passing up there in Tuolumne Meadows and Yosemite. Theoretically, what's that, about 6 inches of snow on the 5th? That's it, but that, hard to believe, probably ain't going to happen. Maybe you get an inch, but we'll keep our eyes on it. And the snow levels. Oh, right. So the red is above freezing temperatures. The gray is supportive of sleet. Between the gray and the white, that's the 32-degree freeze line. So freezing level. Oh, and this blue line here, this is where Tioga Pass Road and the Pacific Crest Trail intersect. It's like 8,900 feet. So the snow, above freezing temperatures the whole way up to 10,000 feet and pretty much holding nonstop. But then as that low, if it theoretically approaches, look at that, snow levels falling down to 6,000 feet, almost 5,500 feet. The valley floor in Yosemite is like 4,000 feet, so it'd just be rain there. But in the higher Sierra, up pretty much where the start, 6,000 feet is about where Tioga Pass Road, branches off from 120 or from the main road going into the valley. And so there could be some slush and whatnot there. Doubtful, but we'll keep our eyes on it. All right, surf spot forecast. Ocean Beach, Northern California, San Francisco. When you see this with like nothing in these occasional spikes that show up, this is surf height. That means just not even wind swell, more like wind chop. So you see, yeah, theoretically 8-foot surf, but most of it 1 foot is just, and look at the wind speeds, 30 miles an hour near the coast here. It's just a mess from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Things finally start settling down on Thursday and Friday. And then, of course, look at this. You see surf going up to 9 feet. My guess is that is all wind swell as well. Let's go take a look here. Pure swell heights, 1.2 feet at 14 seconds. So here's your background southern Hemi swell. And then here's your occasional 8.7 at 9 feet. You know, just a mess. And then a little bit more background southern Hemi swell, 1 foot at 16 seconds. But we know from looking at the wave models, there's no meaningful swell coming until that gale in the south central Pacific gets going. So it's starting now and tomorrow. So it'd be at least a week out till that starts working its way into California. So into the coming weekend, just wind swell basically 8 foot at 10 seconds. You know, not great, but make the most of it. Southern California, Dana Point, this is probably a better rendering of what is going on southern Hemi swell-wise. Waves 1.5 to 2 feet to 1 foot, maybe 2 feet. Wind's not so bad. You can see it right here, you know, a light wind regime. And here's swell heights in the 1 to 2 foot range at, well, this is all wind swell, 10 seconds. It's not even oh, here's the little bits of southern Hemi swell trying to make their way into the forecast, but not resulting in meaningful swell until that gale starts doing its thing. And I wouldn't really expect anything different for Hawaii. Maui, the South Shore, this is a good proxy. Tries to filter out as much as the wind swell. Wave heights in the 1 to 2 foot range. Trades pretty low, or wind's pretty light there. Swell sizes. A little bit of background southern Hemi swell, 1.3 feet at 15 seconds, 1.5 at 14. You get it, 1 foot at 15. So all really small surf for now, but much better is coming. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the two major weather oscillations that affect surf production, you know, more than a week out? So they give us a view, a week to a month to maybe 2 or 3 months or even a season ahead. That is the Madden-Julian Oscillation, short-term one, and of course the El Nino Southern Oscillation. All right, we start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. It has two phases, an active phase and an inactive phase. The active phase is the one we really care about. It is effectively a low-pressure system. The MJO, with its two phases, rotate west to east around the planet on the equator. The active phase on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. We want the active phase moving over the Pacific because when it does that, because it's a low-pressure system, it takes warm, moist air down at the ocean's surface, lifts it high up. That moist air is effectively energy. It gets caught by the jet stream. That energizes the jet stream. It consolidates it and makes it more capable of producing gales, which in turn produce surf, and you know the drill. All right, so we're looking at data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. This is on the equator in the Pacific, but they also have wind sensors on them. We can look at 5-day average winds, and that tells us whether, or gives us hints about whether the active or inactive phase of the MJO is in play across the Pacific. The active phase of the MJO suppresses trade winds. All right, and that is good. It'll show up here. The inactive phase does the opposite because it's like a high pressure system. It increases trade winds. So just looking at the arrows, the winds look pretty much normal. The longer the arrow, the stronger the winds. Pretty much normal over the East Pacific. Oh, and this is the equator here. This is the East Pacific. This is the West Pacific here. Dateline right here. So you go over the Central Pacific. Trades look pretty much normal there and pretty much the same over in the West Pacific. But rather than me guessing at it, anomalies. This is a way to take the actual winds, compare it to what is normal for this time of year, and identify the differences. So when you see these little small easterly arrows, say trades are just a little bit stronger than normal for this time of year over the East Pacific, pretty much normal over the Central, and just barely a little bit above normal over the West Pacific. So not really indicative of the active or the inactive phase, at least according to this. Let's go look at the forecast going out 2 weeks. All right, 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies for the entire planet. Okay, what does that mean? It's just, are the winds stronger out of the east or stronger out of the west than normal? The blues are stronger out of the east. That would be the inactive phase of the MJO. Reds are stronger out of the west. That would be the active phase, the good phase of the MJO. All right, and of course this pink line is just the model is down for a couple of days. Now this is the whole planet. The date line runs right up the middle here, okay? We know where the date line is in the, smack in the middle in the Pacific. Far west Pacific starts about 125 west, so this is way over by New Guinea. Okay, and the area that really matters with the MJO doing its magic, imparting energy to the jet stream, is what we call the Kelvin wave generation area, from the far west Pacific to about 170 west, so just barely east of the date line. Now, this here is all what's been happening in the past, and so you can see if this is the Goldilocks zone between here and here, you can see blue anomalies, east anomalies. This would be the inactive phase of the MJO. And then here is today, the 28th of April. So this is the inactive phase of the MJO in control, producing easterly anomalies. But what's that, 5 days from now? Looks like the active phase of the MJO is supposed to start setting up, producing west anomalies pretty strong and filling the Kelvin wave generation area between there and at least the middle of May. Now remember, we saw the wave models and they showed a series of gales pushing under New Zealand that happens to perfectly coincide with this development of the active phase of the MJO. And we also saw that there's been literally no activity in the southern hemi for the past week, which happens to perfectly coincide with the inactive phase of the MJO. Is it coincidence? Probably not. Now, the relationship between the MJO and the southern hemisphere in their winter, which is our summer, is not as close. It's like a 50-50 correlation, where in the northern hemisphere, up in the Gulf of Alaska and the North Dateline region in our winter, then for sure the correlation is more like 80%. But when you see the active phase of the MJO and westerly anomalies, at least that gets you 50% closer to having surf than being where we are with easterly anomalies right now. Next up, upper level moisture. Basically cloudiness, outgoing long wave radiation. So this just shows you areas that are drier or wetter. Active phase of the MJO, if it's taking warm moist air and lifting it aloft and creating clouds, well, that is moisture. And the inactive phase of the MJO, high pressure, which is falling air, is cloud-free skies. So the oranges are these positive numbers, more sunlight bouncing off the ocean surface. You can't do that if you have clouds, so it's dry air. The greens, wet air. Inactive phase of the MJO, active. Now this is upper level, so it runs about a week ahead of what goes on at the surface. And let's get ourselves oriented. South America, Central America, right here, the equator, dateline roughly there. There's New Guinea, Australia down there. Each panel, 5 days, goes out 40 days, 8 different panels. So inactive phase, trying to exit over the East Pacific. Active phase, starting to work its way into the West Pacific on May 3rd, and then filling the Pacific the whole way through to about the 18th of May. Now remember that what happens is the surface runs about a week later, so this really means out to the 25th of May, even the end of May, and then here comes our next inactive phase after that. So this 3 weeks of May look like a pretty good window according to this model, and that syncs up well with what we saw in the waves models. So we're starting now to get a sense of what is driving the so suspected pulse of southern hemi energy developing under New Zealand. All right, the next model, the CFS model. This goes out a month too, just a different model. You have to compare and contrast models because they don't all tell you the same thing every time. There is, just like people, they have their own opinions and sometimes they don't agree. And we have to try to figure out what reality is between all the models. Maybe just like most people do. You sort of take a bunch of different opinions, put them in a bag, shake it up, and then see what the mixture suggests. All right, so here we are. Date line is right here. This is the same deal. The reds are westerly anomalies. In fact, MJO. Okay, the black contour. So there's a black contour. That's the active phase with its westerly anomalies. The blues, easterly anomalies, dotted contour, inactive phase. Now, this was in February. Oh, and the date line runs right up the middle. Again, this is the whole planet. So the far west Pacific starts here at about 125 west. So the area we're interested in, the forecast starts here. So the area we're interested in is really right here. This is all what has happened in the past. Active phase there in March, inactive phase late March, early April. Kind of dead. Oh, now this one actually shows a dotted contour. Inactive phase of the MJO occurring right now, but going to exit the Kelvin wave generation area in about 3 or 4 days, and the easterly anomalies associated with that pretty much gone by the end of April. Here, and here comes the active phase of the MJO in the far west Pacific, maybe in 3 or 4 days, starting to really get some traction by about May 7th or so, and then traversing its way across the Kelvin wave generation area into mid to late May. After that, no MJO forecasts, but with light easterly anomalies taking root. So again, this looks like our red X period from May 5th through about May 18th or so. And then I tell you not to believe a model more than 4 or 5 days out, but then we're going to go look at a model that goes 3 months out. Why not? What the heck? This gives us, again, that discussion about when you're looking at the MJO and El Nino, and this is sort of a foray into the El Nino situation, or La Nina. Those can be predicted 3, 4, 5 months in advance, and then once that like El Nino or La Nina sets up, they tend to go for a year. So worth taking a look at. All right, so again, the same deal. East-west component of the wind. The blues, easterly anomalies. The yellows and reds, westerly anomalies. Now, this is past activity here. The forecast is on the top in this chart. Whole planet on one chart again. Dateline runs right up the middle, so the key area, West Pacific, starts at 125 east, so right about there, okay, and goes to 170 west, so right about there. So here is the main area. So here is blues. We're guessing that, well, we know that's easterly anomalies, guessing that that is the inactive phase of the MJO. As we get into not even, maybe May 2nd or 3rd, westerly anomalies take over. They go the whole way through about mid-May with secondary westerly anomalies the whole way into the beginning of June. And then the westerly anomaly pattern starts fading. What is also interesting to note here, easterly anomalies setting up California's at 120 west, so south of California, just associated with the inactive phase of the MJO pushing south, on the equator, south of the Pacific, or south in the Pacific. But then notice easterly anomalies building in earnest south of California and expanding their coverage the whole way to the date line as we get to the end of the model run, while westerly anomalies, you see this retrograding further and further west and taking aim or setting up over the maritime continent, if not into the Indian Ocean. Why would that be? Well, let's go look at one. First things first. All right, so here is our current inactive phase, or inactive phase of the MJO. This model, a little bit weird, suggests the active phase is trying to push in even today. It backs off for just a little bit, and then the active phase sets up again with westerly anomalies. I mean, this is really showing a very, very weak active MJO pattern. And notice the active phase of the MJO, which was making it the whole way across the Pacific, making less and less traction off to the east, becoming more locked here. Now, here's the real point, and this would be over the maritime continent. This is why. The black contour here, that is the low pressure bias, so associated with El Nino. So the core of El Nino here, you can see it 1, 2, 3, 4 contour lines back in December, the peak of El Nino down to 3, down to 2, the last contour line fading out as we get into the end of May. But look at this, starting today, the low pressure bias that was set up over the date line starts rebuilding back to the west over Bali and the maritime continent, building as we get into June and July with 2 contours, and then even worse than that, look at this dotted contour, that is a high pressure bias. So that would be the La Nina signal. This is the classic El Nino signal is low pressure in the Pacific, high pressure, there it is over the maritime continent. Then you go into a reverse mode over the summer when La Nina starts developing, and here is your high pressure building over the dateline and low pressure building over the maritime continent. So pretty much not unexpected and pretty typical after coming out of a strong El Nino. You start moving into a La Nina pattern, and that's exactly what the model says, and it says it's happening in the next week. All right, let's take a look subsurface in the ocean, in the Pacific, because that is where you really start seeing the beginnings of, in this case, La Nina developing. We're looking at data from the TAO buoys. Again, East Pacific here, West Pacific here. These are the anchor lines on the buoys. The X's are sensors on those anchor lines. The sensors collect water temperature data, and then you use a model to fill in the gaps. You get a profile of where the warm and cold water is in the Pacific. Typically during La Nina, colder water in the east, warmer water in the west, driven by enhanced, stronger than normal trades, okay? And you can already see the beginnings of that. The depth of the warm water in the East Pacific, pretty shallow, 25 meters. And then you got your 30-degree isotherm here, that's 30 degrees centigrade. Confined to and starting to build, warm water starting to build here to 166 east. That's about where it was last week. The 29-degree isotherm, 167. I don't think it's changed much in a week. And the 28-degree isotherm, pretty much limited to 140 west. But looking subsurface, this really tells the picture. This is the anomalies. This is absolute temperatures, but this is the difference from normal for this time of year. No change from what we saw last week. Massive pool of cold water filling the entire subsurface Pacific, blocking any flow of Kelvin waves. That'd be warm water here, trying to move east, driven by the active phase of the MJO driving westerly anomalies. But we see in a previous chart, we saw the active phase of the MJO getting weaker and weaker and moving more to the west over the Indian Ocean, so it's not even present in the Pacific 3 months from now to be able to push any warm water to the east. Cold water prevails. The depth of the warm pool, pretty shallow in the east, building in the west, and you have 4-degree below normal anomalies here all over the Central Pacific. Another version of that right here makes the picture even more stark. You see nothing but cold anomalies. This would be Ecuador right here to about 140 west. Remember, this is just on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. Maybe it's even 2 degrees. Cold water breaching to the surface, all here, being upwelled by enhanced trades. And there's a massive pool of cooler than normal water here, months worth of upwelling. And here is our warm pool, the last of El Nino warm waters getting pushed by enhanced trades. You see the warm pool building in the west here. This is the beginning of at least a year-long cycle. Sea level anomalies from April 23rd. These are not temperatures. This is the height of the ocean. That is the sphere of the ocean. Take a satellite, you beam radar down. It's super accurate to within like 2.5 centimeters, which is what, like that much. And it tells you whether the ocean sphere, if you take out the waves, the wind waves, and the tide, is it higher or lower than normal? Why would you care? Well, you can infer what's going on deep in the ocean by that. Cold water at depth contracts. When it contracts, the water above it will create a divot. It'll sort of recess, You'll end up like you do here with -5, -10, -15 centimeter anomalies. Warm water at depth expands and it'll displace the water above that warm water pool higher up, and then you get sort of like there, these oranges. Now, let's get ourselves oriented. Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Galapagos Islands. This is the equator. That's the date line. Hawaii's up here. You get the drill. Right here, colder. One can infer colder than warmer normal temperatures by the -15 centimeter anomalies from an Ecuador, almost the date lines there, out to a point south of Hawaii. This is actually smaller and not as intense as it was last week, but have no fear. This is not going to magically disappear. We think it just sort of, it pulses and, you know, breathes just like El Nino does, just like the MJO is. It's sort of, you know, if you want to be figurative, poetic here, yeah, the planet is breathing and things move in cycles, and this is part of that cycle. You can see the breathing cycle here, upper ocean heat anomalies. This goes back in time into May of last year. There's the West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Reds and oranges are warmer than normal temperatures. You can see they were driven by active phase of the MJO, driving Kelvin waves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was even actually it was like 9 of them that made it across the Pacific into February of this year. And while all the warm water that had built up for the 3-year La Nina and then some over in the West Pacific finally all got pushed to the east, cold water started developing in the West Pacific, and then it follows the exact same pattern. And here we go now, all of it build up off the East Pacific with just the faint little hints of the warm water cycle building up, the recharge cycle. This is really where we are, okay? We had our big El Nino, all the warm water did its thing, and what the atmosphere is basically doing by this is releasing a lot of latent heat energy in the atmosphere, sort of blowing it off, and then the atmosphere typically overcorrects, and now we're going to go into a cold cycle, and the oceans support all this. It's the interaction of the atmosphere and the ocean together to help express heat from the atmosphere, and for that matter, deep ocean temperatures as well. So that's down in the ocean, but that doesn't matter as much, at least in the near term, as what's going on at the ocean surface. Warm water on the ocean surface, or warmer than normal water, supports evaporation. And evaporation, just like the active phase of the MJO, if you have warm, moist air lifting up, then that helps fuel storm development. Eventually it gets captured up in the jet stream and does all its magic. Well, so now we're looking at sea surface temperature anomalies off of Chile, Peru, Ecuador right here, the Galapagos right there. This is the equator, and it's all governed and managed by literally this thin little strip on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. So last week we had nothing but El Nino temperatures other than a little bit of cool water here off of Peru and Ecuador. Now all of a sudden, look at this, a thin tongue, probably the first beginnings of La Nina. We actually had one of these a couple of weeks ago. It was even thinner and weaker, and again, that sort of breathing motion. It showed up, and then it disappeared for a week or two. Here it comes, building again. We know there is a massive pool of cooler than normal water subsurface. This is no big surprise. The beginnings of La Nina appearing on the ocean surface while the remnants of El Nino are still very present on the ocean surface. But you sort of get the sense, look at all the warm water out here. Some of this warm water, or a lot of the surface warm water, is starting to get pushed off to the west. The sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, Central America. Whoa, what is this? Just over the past 7 days. Now, this is not saying colder than normal absolute temperatures, but what it says is that temperatures are falling precipitously here off of the Galapagos. No big surprise. We know there's piles of warm water subsurface. It's leaching up to the surface, getting forced up to the surface. And as the inactive phase of the MJO is likely passing over this area, it's increasing trades, which only then increases upwelling, which then taps that pool of cool water subsurface, and it starts manifesting itself itself down at the surface. And then what you end up with is here, the cold water tongue. Again, the beginnings of La Nina starting to show. Now, you kind of look here and you go, the whole planet is warmer than normal. Ocean surface temperatures, they certainly are. This is a known situation. You probably read about it in the press, and I'm not going down that rabbit hole now. But this is, and what is considered normal is updated every 5 years, I believe. They have a running 30-year base average of what is normal, like from 1980 to 2010. And then they'll update it 5 years from now and another 5 years from now, because the planet is constantly getting warmer. And what used to be El Nino in the old days, nowadays is just like normal. So it's all this, the difference between warm water and cooler water, or what's going on in the rest of the planet. But when the rest of the planet's getting warmer, well, then it becomes a little bit harder to decide what's El Nino and what's not. Also notice, again, we've talked about this, much warmer than normal water here off Africa, tropical waves pushing off of Africa. In the summer months, they have a lot of fuel here to help create hurricanes, assuming the El Nino upper level flow doesn't shear them off. So we'll be watching here as we get into the later in summer, we'll say July sort of time frame. Sea surface temperature trend in the two regions, the Nino 1.2 region. This is right there by the Galapagos in Ecuador. No big surprise. Temperatures falling. In fact, they've actually kind of come up for the past week. Today's value neutral. 33 thousandths of a degree above normal, but we saw all that upwelling that's going on. I suspect you're going to see this starting to fall off a cliff. And then you go to the Nino 3.4 index, the steady, slow demise of El Nino. Today's value, 434 thousandths of a degree, so less than half a degree above normal. Cutoff for a weak El Nino is half a degree to 1 degree. 1 to 1.5 degrees is medium El Nino. 1.5 to 2 is strong El Nino. We were in the top end of a strong El Nino, and now we're pretty much approaching. We're in the undefined region. From half degree to half degree below normal to half degree above is considered neutral. So we're now officially, at least for 1 day, moving into the neutral category. Sea surface temperature anomaly coverage, warm waters. This is the West Pacific. This is the East Pacific here. Going back a year, so this would be May of 2023. The beginnings of our El Nino forming off of Ecuador. The steady buildup of warmer than normal temperatures. These are sea surface temperature anomalies. So much warmer than normal temperatures, promoting, again, evaporation, which supports the jet stream. When you have all this warm water building up in the East Pacific, it drags the jet stream over this direction, which gives us our storm track and gave us our much above normal precipitation in Southern California, and actually even a little bit above normal in Northern California. I think we're at like 110% snowfall-wise, and rain-wise about the same. But here you go, the beginnings of cool anomalies starting to just show up. So this is the beginnings of La Nina. Just like a year ago, this was the beginnings of El Nino. So the cycle continues. And finally, what do we think the atmosphere is doing? Well, the atmosphere always lags behind 3 or 4 months what's going on in the ocean. The ocean and the winds and the MJO and all that stuff, it's kind of sporadic and it does things, but it's got to do things in a meaningful fashion over an extended period of time and not be wavering in its presentation to really start affecting jet stream level circulations around the entire planet. So we say the atmosphere is like a big boat. It takes a long time to change. So we're looking at, what's going on with the atmosphere? We're looking at the Southern Oscillation Index. Difference in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin. This index goes back, I think, 200 years. So they have a good track record. Tahiti in the Pacific, Darwin over the Indian Ocean. When pressure is lower in Tahiti relative to Darwin, the index goes negative. So minus 5.12 today. That 1 day doesn't make a trend, but if you have a couple of days, and we see a little pulse of it here, maybe the beginnings of the active phase of the MJO pushing into the Pacific, or maybe it's just a localized low-pressure system over Tahiti affecting the index. We go back in time, well, here we go. This definitely looks like the active phase of the MJO because numbers went way down here in the early part of April, and then they've, for the most part, I don't know, hung about neutral. Let's see the 30-day average here. Get my head out of the way. 30-day average, minus 7.02. And look at this. It's actually lower now than when it was a month ago. Okay? That would suggest the inactive or the active phase of the MJO, maybe. But this index has been so screwed up this whole entire El Nino. I don't know how much to believe it or not. 90-day average, pretty much the same, minus 7.65. And where has it been? We're actually lower now than we were right after the tail of the peak of El Nino a month ago. So who knows? Right now, though, none of these are particularly deep. If these were all down at if these two were down at 15, I'd say, yeah, that's a strong El Nino or the hangover from El Nino footprint. But this is just kind of noise level. But let's look at a graph. Here we go, 30-day moving SOI. This is the 30-day average. All right, so back in, there is neutral right there. If you're above the line for any length of time, that would suggest the La Nina. The downward spikes, you see them here, here, here. That's the active phase of the MJO. Pressure getting lower over Tahiti. The upward spikes are the inactive phase of the MJO. So here's the beginning of our El Nino in 2023. Massive run of strong active phases of the MJO. We go, here we are, moving into super El Nino status. And we got in July and the whole thing just fell apart. Tried to regroup in the fall, but never really got to where it was. And then from since then, it looks like the inactive phases of the MJO, with one little exception here, have taken control or been dominant. That said, we're still somewhere in El Nino-ish territory from the 30-day moving SOI perspective, but I suspect that will be short-lived. Sea surface temperature forecast in the official El Nino monitoring region. This is the area on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, from a point south of California out to about the date line. Well, here was the peak of our El Nino where we got temperatures 2 degrees above normal for a couple of days. Been steadily falling since. The solid line is actuals. Today we're at, what, 0.75 of a degree, or actually, yeah, 0.75 of a degree. So still in weak El Nino status. This is the forecast. This model has overhyped the demise, accelerated from what's really been happening, though maybe it's getting a better handle on it. But it says we'll be dead neutral by the end of May. And then as we get into November's time frame, temperatures going down to minus 1.75 degrees. That's a bit on the rash side. The PDF corrected, a little bit more conservative view says minus 1.5 degrees. And I think it was last week we looked at all the other models and the consensus forecast, and they all said about minus 1 degree. So maybe this is overhyping it, but you guys know the drill. We're in the spring unpredictability barrier. The models have a really hard time on deciding exactly what's going to happen. We will know much better when we get to June 1st. We're out of springtime, and then for whatever reason, once you get into summer, the models have a much better handle on what's happening. That said, I think this is a bit on the overhyped side, suggesting a strong La Nina. Don't think we're going to see that. At least I'm hoping not. So for right now, looks like the active phase of the MJO is about ready to start knocking on our door. It will drag westerly anomalies into the Pacific. When that happens, that'll feed energy to the jet stream. We saw it even starting now, the beginnings of the first little gale and energization of the jet stream, energization of the jet stream in the southern hemisphere, helping support gale formation. And if you believe the models, a whole series of troughs forecast pushing under New Zealand, exactly as one would expect in a early summertime pattern following a strong El Nino. We'll see what actually happens, but like the teaser or the header for this video said, it's a tease. The southern hemisphere is teasing, and it looks pretty good. We'll see what actually happens, but it looks like we're set for if one were to guess, 2 to maybe 3 weeks of good southern hemi swell. Make the most of it when and if it happens, because after that we'll go back into the inactive phase and things will probably go slack for a while. Looking longer term, for sure, we're out of El Nino, or nearly so, moving towards La Nina. The coming winter will be a La Nina winter. That said, when you are the winter after a strong El Nino, there is still lots of moisture circulating in the upper atmosphere. Also, the Tonga volcano from 2 or 3 years ago put lots of moisture into the atmosphere. So we're not at all convinced that this coming winter, just because it's going to be La Nina, will necessarily be a dry one, at least in terms of snowfall. What it ends up doing is creating these the backdoor trough scenario, which drags lots of cold air along with the precipitation. Does good for making snow, but along the coast, you don't get as much rain. So we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed for that. That would give us 3 years of normal to above normal precipitation, or even nearly normal, which would be a good thing, because now I'm making a prediction 2 years from now that we're going to go into another one of these dry cycles, and maybe not such a good surf pattern with that. So make the most of all this while you can. Other than that, for right now, a little bit of a slack time, so go do your work, go do what you need to do so you can be available when the surf starts. All right, if you enjoyed the video, of course, give us a thumbs up. Questions or concerns, write them up down below. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you want to make a contribution, special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And other than that, thank you for watching. We will do this again next week. Same channel, same time. Thanks for watching.